Nice to see you guys checking in for the webinar. My name is Federica, and I'm the community manager at Eupry. I am organizing these webinars together with Jakob, or our chief quality officer. So while we wait for everyone to just settle in and join the webinar, we always love to hear where you guys are from. So if you don't mind, please let us know where in the world you're watching our webinar from. It's always nice to see. We have a lot of different people checking in from Europe and from North America and different parts of the world. So if you don't mind, let us know where you're watching from. We will be starting shortly. Just to let you know, we're super excited about this webinar. We have also Ashish joining in from CanSat Consulting. There we go, different places from Pennsylvania, Toronto, Canada. Exciting. We also have our coworker Chase Stone, who's a product specialist with us. He will be on the chat to assist with any questions alongside of me. And the guys will also try to answer these questions during our Q&A. I'll hand the floor over to you, Jakob, and you, Ashish, so you can give us a short introduction on who you guys are and what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Frederica. So yeah, we're truly excited today because normally we talk a lot about mappings and temperature compliance within our main areas, which are within distribution and the GMP industries. But today we're joined by Ashish. Welcome very much, Ashish. We're very excited to have you on board. Ashish has 10 years of experience and the last 5 years within GACP and Cannabis. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of interesting points for us today. There's a lot I've learned at least over a few conversations in preparation for this webinar. So I'm really, really excited to have an idea of what we're working with. My own name is Jakob Konradsen, and I'm the head of quality here at Eupry. I work with maintaining all of our internal validation and our systems and helping our customers stay compliant with temperature, relative humidity, differential pressure, all related to environmental control. But I'm not going to be the one talking today. So Ashish, I'll basically hand it over to you. We're really excited to hear what you have to say this time.
Hey, thanks, Jakob, for the introduction. And let me know, guys, if I'm not audible or if you see any issues with the voice. But very thank you for the introduction. So I'm Ashish. I'm the CEO and founder of CanSat Consulting. So during my course of my company running and through my experiences, I see a lot of questions around the environmental monitoring, especially in the medical cannabis sector, like how we can ensure that you can have compliant operations from the environmental monitoring point of view. So in today's presentation, that's what I'm going to discuss, and much of our clients have this concern from our quality and regulatory point of view. So to start with, I think the very first slide I will go with that what are GACP and what are GMP standards. However, the focus today is not to just talk and go in very detail on GACP and GMP, but just to have an overview for our audience. So GACP is good agriculture collection practices, while GMP is good manufacturing practices. Now, you might be wondering, like, what is the difference between two? They sound very similar terms, isn't it? So while the good agriculture cultivation practices from the medical cannabis point of view, it covers all the cultivation stages. And during a medical cannabis grow, you have propagation, flowering, vegetative different stages. And then you have harvesting, like you're harvesting any crops. So GACP covers all of those stages, including harvesting. And then there is a drying of plants and trimming of plants. Now, that's where GMP also starts. So as the name suggests, GMP is good manufacturing practices. And in good manufacturing practices, it starts from drying, trimming, processing, which includes your packaging, extraction, formulations, and other areas. Now, there is also somewhere what we have seen is a point of confusion between GACP and GMP. What I meant to say is, where does the GACP ends and where does the GMP starts? So in those overlapping standards, there are two stages, which is drying and trimming, that overlaps between GACP and GMP. And that is where you have to know which country you are importing cannabis or exporting cannabis from, because the importing countries' standards on GMP might have a little bit different requirements than the importing country in another country, although they might be following same GMP standards. So it is very important to know the exact standards what you are going to follow. So why it matters, why it is so important to follow GMP or GACP standards. So one thing I would like to clarify here is that when we talk about GMP standards, they're nothing new. Like if you have any medical drug you are consuming, they are produced in pharmaceutical environment and they are known to follow very strict GMP requirements. However, when it comes to medical cannabis, the standards are difficult to apply because the standards are written from pharmaceutical point of view, but now you have to apply to a plant, how it is growing and how it is applied. So this is a general understanding of GACP and GMP. And without going in too many details, as that's not our intention to talk about today, I will just give you some brief overview of different compliance standards across the globe. Now, when I say globe, like you could have hundreds of different standards applied, but the main focus is Health Canada and also the international markets, such as Israel, Germany, and Australia. So when we talk about Health Canada has GPP standards, which is Good Production Practices Standards, and that is as per Cannabis Act and regulations, and that's what is implemented in Canada. And then if we go to international markets like Israel, Germany, or Australia, and I work with a lot of clients in these spaces, or at least the Canadian clients who wants to actually get certified and export their product to Israel, Germany, and Australia. So they have to comply with the requirements of GACP and GMP, depending on in what format they are exporting their product, like whether it's a bulk format, like big 1 kg, 2 kg medical cannabis bags, or they are into individual immediate containers. So that's where the compliance standards come into play. So there is also another standard which is called as IMC GAP, which I have not mentioned here to keep it simple. But if you are exporting product to Israel, medical cannabis to Israel, then you have to comply with their standard, which is known as IMC GAP. Israel Medical Cannabis, and GAP stands for Good Agriculture Practices. But if you ask me, what is the common scenario between all these standards? It's all to make sure that you are producing medical cannabis consistently with high quality, and also with set of standards which receiving company can rely on and trust you, because they're not going to obviously see each and every element how you're producing your cannabis. That's why it is important for them to have some sort of standards which you have followed to produce that medical cannabis. This is a GACP and GMP process flow, and I love this slide because it kind of breaks it down. What is GACP, what is GMP, and how you can visualize like how does the whole process flow look like. Now, I won't go in explaining what is mother plants, what is cloning. I'm pretty sure like this is something can be easily understandable. But in a general sense, the plants is going through different stages: cloning, flowering. Before flowering, you have a vegetative stage. So the plants is growing smaller to bigger, and then you harvest. And everyone loves harvesting, correct? Like you're harvesting crops. So after harvesting, you have drying and trimming. As you will notice, the drying and trimming box is overlapping between GACP and GMP. And there's a reason for that. And that's where the confusion a little bit also comes as, okay, if you are having a GACP, is your trimming or drying part of GACP, or do you have to go to GMP? And if you just have to comply with GACP, you shouldn't be thinking about GMP without your research, because having a GMP facility is like you need a material airlock, personal airlock, you need all those different components, which cost millions and millions of dollars in building those facilities. So obviously, many of the clients when I started in cannabis world, or even when I was working as a QA manager, director of quality, the question will come, how do we get EU GMP certification? And at that point of time, I didn't have the answer, and I will start researching. But I think now my question is, do you have a budget of $1 million or above to start thinking about, or maybe redesigning a facility for the EU GMP or the GMP standards. So, depending again which country you're exporting to, the GMP standards could vary a lot. And Europe market, Germany specifically, has one of the stringent GMP requirements to be followed, which is EU GMP requirements. So this in this slide, we can also see that as we are going into GMP, if you are putting your product, medical cannabis, into immediate containers, like you go to pharmacy, you have to buy a drug or medical cannabis, you're not going to go and buy loose product. You want to have in proper containers, which has done stability testing, the labels around it and everything. All of those activities come under GMP. They do not fall under GACP. The GACP is taking part of, as the name suggests, agriculture, while M in GMP is taking part of manufacturing. So that we have covered GACP and GMP process flow. Also the extraction I would like to mention here. Any of the extraction activities, they will also classify under processing, and that will also cover under GMP requirements. So before I go to the next slide and covering what are the different temperature or humidity ranges I have come across, I want to actually focus on this slide first, because that is the key slide I consider in this presentation, and to start with the environmental monitoring in GACP and GMP environment. So the very first question which might comes to your mind is whether GACP, whether the environmental monitoring, which is temperature and humidity particularly, is only applicable in GACP, GMP, or both. Well, the short answer is it's applicable in both. However, if you ask me, is the level of implementation, like how hard you should enforce that, is it same in GACP and GMP? The answer I would give you is it depends on your facility, depends on your importing country, depends on your quality agreement. But the short answer is that you have to be much, much more careful in your GMP environment and also implement the environmental monitoring however in GACP. The reason being is if you do not have robust temperature and humidity monitoring in GMP environment, your product can get spoiled easily. There could be cross contamination, especially with something like medical cannabis. It's not like a food product which is highly processed, which can be cooked at a high temperature, or a pharmaceutical product which is in a shelf-stable form. Cannabis is in a dried form, could be easily contaminated. That's why you have to take a lot of preventive actions, and one of the preventive action is maintenance of your temperature and humidity. Now, when it comes to temperature and humidity, what I have seen a lot is, and starting with clients or going into the client site, quite a few of those companies are startup, and they are putting a lot of seed money, like they're starting their company and going, putting their hard-earned money in that. And when someone is putting their hard-earned money, like they have to use it properly. Like they have to make sure that this is getting their bucket for they're getting the proper revenue out of it. So temperature and humidity sensors implementation, sometime I've seen like they will go to any of their local grow store, buy a $20 sensor, come and place in their grow rooms. Now the issue with those temperature and humidity sensors are you do not have any automated monitoring, you do not have any reports getting out of it. They are not calibrated, they are not validated, and you don't even know if they're reading properly. And it seems like there is not so much urgency because when someone is using those sensors, they're just thinking from GACP point because the humidity is also an important factor in growing cannabis. However, they forget to take into account that these sensors or proper sensors for humidity monitoring or temperature monitoring is very important from GMP point. As soon as you grow cannabis, your plants can able to handle some stress in terms of fluctuations in temperature and humidity. But when you have dried and trimmed and you're putting your product for packaging or you're extracting your package, you cannot take risk with a high humidity environment. And that I'm going to cover as I go further in explaining about the different grow areas. So when talking about temperature and humidity sensors, I'm going to cover on these few elements, and to keep time in mind and spending some time on all of these elements, but not spending too much time too. So one, I'm going to discuss about alarm holding, alert, and action limits. And before even I go into that, maybe let's first talk about the calibration part. If you're going to get any of the temperature and humidity sensors, because those are the two main elements you want to monitor in your operations, those two elements or those sensors which you're going to get, you have to make sure 100% that they are calibrated. When I say calibrated, you have to make sure that they have some sort of proper calibration certificate you get. If that certificate is traceable to NSF standards, that's well and above and beyond, and that might be more applicable also on the GMP requirements. And then also, I would suggest not to go with the paper monitoring. Like, you're not going to your sensors every morning and evening and writing your readings, temperature and humidity, because it's a time consuming step. And if you have multiple rooms facility, you will be spending a lot of time in monitoring and analyzing that data and scanning that data, obviously. So having an environmental monitoring platform which is more on the automated sense, and when I say automated, that it has certain functionalities, and those functionalities includes, for instance, alarm holding, alert, and action limits. So what is alarm holding? One interesting thing in growing cannabis is you have to apply a lot of water. Like any crop, you have to apply a lot of water. So when you apply a lot of water, either in the form of fertigation or you're applying pesticides, so what it does is, if you have a humidity set, for instance, 60%, let's take a number 60%. When you apply those fertilizers or pesticides, humidity is going to spike. It's going to spike to 80% or 90%. Now, if that 80% or 90% excursion is happening, you're going to get so many false alarms that it will obviously, in my terminology, blow up your mind. Like, you will have so many alarms, false alarms. Either you have to shut it off or you don't want to have received those false alarms. So what you do, you set up an alarm holding period. Alarm holding allows you that it will hold your alarm for a certain period of time, even if the readings are going out of specification. So basically, we reduce those false alarms. That alarm holding period will help. So for humidity, for instance, I set up about 1 hour to 2 hours of alarm holding for relative humidity, not for temperature. And the reason is that humidity fluctuates a lot in cannabis operations compared to temperature. Temperature, I have never in my 5 years dealing with multiple clients seen a case where the temperature has reached 45 degrees Celsius, no matter whatever the situation, or 40 degrees Celsius. I have seen 30, 35 in the growing environment, but I have not seen very high temperature. And the reason being is temperature fluctuations usually are easier manageable, and they don't happen so often compared to humidity. And one of the most common causes of in terms of environmental monitoring context, contamination, is because of humidity rather than temperature. Because if you have a very high humidity will result in condensation, and the condensation will result in growth of yeast and mold, which above 75% you will start to see that growth. So alarm holding allows you to actually hold your alarm for a certain period. So if you're setting, for instance, 1 or 2 hours for your relative humidity, for temperature, you cannot go 1 or 2 hours. You do not have the liberty to have a temperature of very high, whatever the temperature range is, or very low temperature range for 2 hours. Plant will be very susceptible to very high temperature range. That's why you might want to consider maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even if you set an alarm holding for temperature. Now, what are alert and action limits? So I think action limits, and I'm pretty sure our audience is very well versed in all of this terminology, but just to give a little brief idea, action limits is equivalent to your out of specifications. If I'm setting a 60% humidity limit for my packaging room, and it breaches that 60%, that means it's breaching action limit. And an alert limit is equivalent to your internal limit. And it's not mandatory to set alert limits. But I do recommend, if you can, you set it up. But maybe you want to set an alert limit to 55%, because that will give you an indication that it has breached the internal limits. You get an alarm, you fix it before it reaches out to, if before it breaches your action limits. So this is the concept of alarm, holding alert, and action. And if you guys have any question, feel free to put it in the question box, and I can answer afterwards. The next is real-time alarm notifications. Now, this is a strike difference between paper monitoring and automated monitoring. If you have paper monitoring, you're going in the morning, you're going in the evening, and you might be writing down your minimum and maximum through using their sensors, even if their sensor has that capability. If you have your minimum and maximum data, and if it has breached at your specifications, you wouldn't know how long it has breached for. You wouldn't know in what real time basis it has breached. It will be hard for you to investigate. It is going to be very difficult to investigate and come to a conclusion where the breach has happened and to find a root cause. That's where the real time alarm notifications are really useful. And also consider the fact if you're sleeping during nighttime, or if you are away from your home or away from your facility, or the facility is not running 24 hours, and there is your HVAC suddenly shut down. How would you know if you're doing paper monitoring? So the real-time alarm notification at least can give you an idea. Okay, there is something wrong at your facility, and you better look into that before your plants or before your cannabis has been spoiled. The next is I would like to discuss is documentation of monitoring data. And I think this has already been very obvious and has been covered, I think, in my discussion till now. It is easier to download your reports when you have that data recorded every 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and you can see that data in a form of graphical format. So automated monitoring system actually helps you actually visualize that graphical format, and that's very useful. And I have done both paper and automated. While in the paper format, I do have that data, but apart from telling me that it is out of specification or not, I have no use of that data unless I'm trending that data for multiple months and years. But I only have 2 data points or 3 data points per day. But if I'm going through automated monitoring, I have hundreds of data points. I can use those hundreds of data points for trending and see, even to identify any persistent excursions. Like if I see there is a sudden spike and that spike is happening during nighttime, and I've seen that, like I see that there is a sudden hike in humidity during nighttime, because during night the outside environment is colder, which also helps in not help, which actually results in increase in the humidity inside. Your HVAC is not functioning as better during the daytime to manage that. Sometimes that could also happen. So you can find those trends with that data points and easily identify and spot for investigation. One of our practices we follow in our consulting for our clients, every day our associate will actually go to the monitoring system for the clients, and they will download last 24 hours of data in a report format and the graph format. And then we will analyze that what are the spikes, and if there is any breach on the environmental limits, and account for that and then start investigating. And it actually tells us how long is that breach for. That's very helpful. If you have a breach for 10 seconds or 20 seconds compared to a breach of 2 hours, which one you're going to prioritize first, given the resources? Obviously, the 2 hours. 10 second, 20 second could be just an excursion because someone has maybe opened the door for too long, or maybe there is a high air circulation in a particular area. So there are multiple reasons an excursion could happen. Now, the next point I want to discuss is automation, that is example HVAC integration. So this is very interesting. Part of my life I have spent in Saskatchewan, and most of you might not know, but Saskatchewan is a very cold place in Canada where temperature goes until minus 40, minus 45 degrees Celsius. And when I was there for almost 8 years, A good city, good place to live in, but overall very cool place. But during my period when I was implementing monitoring system there, and the facility was getting built in, we got some of the very high quality HVAC units imported from US, and those are very good units, very well established company and everything. But when we implemented those units, everything is going well. But suddenly, when the temperature hits minus 40, 45 degrees Celsius, we noticed that the units were not performing very well. There was breakdowns very often, or maybe they were not made for very cold climate, and it was not done well research before being bought, or whatever is the case. So what we also notice is that the sensors, sometime you have that, not sometime, now it's most of the time, the temperature and humidity sensors come integrated with the HVAC units. Now the question comes to your mind, if I have temperature and humidity sensors in the HVAC unit, why I need my monitoring also, or why you need separate monitoring tools like another temperature and humidity sensors. The reason is that those temperature monitoring units or humidity monitoring units in the HVAC, you have to properly validate and also have to compare the data against your sensors, against your calibrated sensors which you're going to get. Because the sensors with the HVAC, you don't know how those sensors are placed, where they are placed, whether they are inbuilt sensors, whether those have sensors which are touching the wall, whether that sensor is not even coming at the ground level or they're just staying at the top. All of that could actually lead to different values compared to your calibrated sensor which you will source. So that is where, like, do not rely blindly on your HVAC integrated sensors. Those sensors work, but you also have to have some individually calibrated, validated sensors from well-established company where you can actually compare the data, have faith, and then maybe have some analysis to see if those two values are similar. And you will be surprised. You will notice that there will be a wide difference in the readings because how you are placing your sensors, where you're placing your sensors. So that's where keep in mind that in HVAC integrated sensors are good, but do not rely completely on that. Do your own research and also compare it against with some of the reference sensors you have. The next I'm going to discuss is monitoring during transportation and why it is so critical. In Canada, when we ship product between different states, provinces, and we have individual boards, like we have Ontario Cannabis Store, we have a Saskatchewan board where we ship the product to, and all boards have different requirements how we ship the products to them. So, for instance, if I'm shipping the product to Saskatchewan, they might have a lesser requirements compared to if I'm shipping the product to Ontario. And for instance, if you have to ship dried cannabis to Ontario Cannabis Store, there is no temperature control truck requirements. But if I want to ship extracts, edibles, temperature control trucks are required. Now these requirements changes if I want to export the product from Canada to Germany, Israel, or any other key export emerging markets. Because even exporting the dried cannabis there, we need to have temperature controlled carriers. We need to have thermal blankets which goes on the pallet to ensure that temperature is maintained at a certain range. We also have to put temperature and humidity sensors with our pallets when we are exporting the products, so the receiving party can actually ensure that there was no out of specifications because of temperature. Usually, more often than not, it's only the temperature which we have to monitor when we are exporting the product, because I have not come across a case where humidity was also required, and it would be very hard to manage humidity when you are exporting the product. But temperature is very key to manage and to make sure that you are actually finding a vetted transportation carrier and properly validate them through your documentation procedures before you hand your product, because you have spent millions of dollars to produce product to get your certification, and that's your last leg of exporting the product. So, and transportation itself is also a very complex process because of strikes, because of different elements which you cannot control. So, if you're thinking that your product will ship in 2 days, for instance, it could take 10 days. Now, maybe you were thinking for 2 days why you need proper environmental monitoring or why you need that. But maybe you can control it for a day, but you cannot control something for 10 days. That's where be prepared, have properly validated companies, vet them, maybe visit them, make sure that their trucks are clean, make sure that you ask them the questions how you're going to ensure that the product is shipping from thousands of miles, it stays within that temperature range. What are the steps you are taking as a service provider? So ask them these questions, and that will be helpful and build you confidence when you're exporting your product. Temperature mapping, I would not cover. Jakob is the expert, and I'm pretty sure he has covered that multiple times during the webinars which they do. So I will leave that out. But just on a note, yes, temperature mapping is very crucial and important. And it goes without saying that you have to make sure that temperature mapping is done regardless of GACP and GMP environment. Qualification and validation. And I have briefly touched base on this. You have to make sure that the sensors you are obtaining, the companies you are working with to obtain those sensors, not just those sensors are validated in terms of like you're getting your calibration certificate and how often you're going to calibrate. All those factors should be in place. Your SOP should be in place for that. But you're also qualifying the company as a service provider. So whether the software they have as part of GMP, you might have to validate that software before you use that, or that could be asked as part of your audit requirements. So make sure that the qualification and validation part is also covered. Training. So as it goes, and training is very essential. And I will give you an example why training is important and where the issues come up. So many of the times when we implement environmental monitoring systems, and let's take an example of automated, because that's what I've implemented the most. Automated environmental monitoring system, you have to decide who all are going to have access to that system. If you have a bigger company and you give an access to only one person, and that person will have too many alarms or notifications to manage, that will not work. So you should have access given to all the different people, regardless they have role or not, but more people the merrier, so they can actually understand that where the breach is happening or if they have to act on it and how fast. And these all the things should be covered during the training. Because usually when we do the training, we go through the SOP management, we go through general overview of the system, but we do not discuss about who is going to handle what if there is a breach is happening, and in what cases, what level of enforcement you want to take. Are you going to prioritize that over any other thing you have going on? Or are you going to have not considered as a priority if your humidity reaches 60% to 90% and it's staying for 5 hours? I've seen very often temperature and humidity monitoring are not given a very high priority, especially in the cultivation phase. And what I see that the effect goes into the GMP also. Because when you're not managing during the cultivation, what is the proof you're going to manage during the processing, which is during GMP? That is where the culture of the quality builds from the cultivation to the processing at the same level. It's not like I have never seen that someone who is not paying attention in cultivation starts to pay too much attention during GMP. I always see that the attention is same. That's why it's important that when you build your training program for implementing environmental monitoring, involve all the relevant parties, make sure that they know their responsibilities, they know how to close the alarms, how to write notes in the system, how to initiate an investigation, and they are well aware about their responsibilities and their accountabilities. So it just does not fall on your QA department, but also your operation department is well involved. I have a couple of more slides to cover, so I'm just going to touch base on last thing, which is monitoring excursions. So when we talk about excursions, excursions are your fluctuations in your temperature or humidity monitoring, which could happen because of multiple factors, and they does not represent a real out of specification, like an actual out of specification. It's like a spike, so it goes up, it goes down, and it happens very quickly. If you have a spike for 2 hours, that's not an excursion, that's actually an out of specification. But let's say if you have a spike which comes back within 15 second to 20 second, or maybe half a minute to 1 minute, that, or maybe 10 minutes, that could be an excursion. And you also have to understand the concept of relative humidity. If you are applying fertilizers and you have for 2 hours high humidity, you might think, oh, that's an out of specification. But that's an out of specification because you don't have alarm holding in place. And that could be an excursion. So there are multiple factors you have to be aware. That's where reading that graph, reading the chart, or analyzing the data will help you to identify those excursions. I have seen, and I think I mentioned, I have seen multiple times humidity increases suddenly during night, temperature drops. Colder nights, so as the temperature goes down, humidity spikes up. There's an inverse relationship, and I see that during night. Fortunately, we do not have any growing happening, or people are present during that period of time. But it is important to manage that temperature and humidity 24 hours. But at least that excursion will help you. But if you're in the GMP environment and do not have people, or you're not processing anything in the GMP environment, like you're not packing obviously during night and most of the places, and if your temperature drops to 15 degrees Celsius, that's fine because you don't have any cannabis in there. But if the temperature drops or increases suddenly in secure storage, where you have product all the time, that is going to create issues and can lead to cross-contamination. So I hope this slide gives you multiple elements to consider for an automated environmental monitoring system. Also, some of the benefits of implementing an automated environmental monitoring system and key factors to consider. So briefly, I want to cover 2 slides here. Temperature range across GACP and GMP stages. Now, I want to give a piece of advice. Do not just use these slides as it is to implement at your site. These are indication or some of the ranges which are given to you. Some of the ranges which I have implemented for my clients, which work for them, but yours, it might depend on which standard you are implementing, GACP or GMP. It might also depend on what kind of product you are producing. So it depends on multiple factors. But it gives you a general sense of idea of what temperature and humidity you can target. So temperature range across GACP and GMP stage, and I will cover the humidity in the next slide. So for GACP, when we talk cultivation, it covers from propagation, vegetative, flowering, and harvesting. Ideal temperature ranges 18 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. And during different stages, propagation, vegging, and flowering, I have not seen that the temperature is always 18 to 30. I've seen temperature sometimes goes to 32, 33, 35 in flowering, because we are using high power LED lights that it produces a lot of heat, and you cannot just sit down and maintain at 20-25 degrees Celsius in your flowering. That's not just possible. But at the same time, you do not want to have your plants sitting at 40 degrees Celsius. That will actually produce a lot of stress on them and impact the quality of cannabis. So 18 to 30 degrees Celsius is a good range to target. Drying and trimming, 15 degrees to 25 degrees Celsius, somewhere in the ambient temperature range. If you maintain that 15 to 25, that's good enough to manage your humidity, so manage your temperature level. And you don't want to go too high temperature or too low, like you don't want to go 10 degrees Celsius also, because that could also impact the quality of cannabis. So 15 to 25 is usually a good range. The storage, ambient storage requirements 15 to 25. However, you can very well target 15 to 20. That's a good target range. I don't like the idea to keep 225 because that's where like it's kind of a threshold. Like if you're going above 25, I don't like that idea too. So 15 to 20 is what I will target, but 15 to 25 will also make sure to maintain the quality of the cannabis, like in the ambient temperature range. Now, storage of fresh frozen cannabis. So when you are harvesting cannabis, you can dry and produce dry flower, or you can you can harvest the whole plant, freeze it, and just use it for extraction. Okay, so that's why it's called as fresh cannabis or frozen cannabis. That is usually used as a biomass for extraction. For extraction, you need tons of cannabis. Believe me, you need a lot of amount of cannabis to extract, and that's why it's a costly process. So if you have to store your material for extraction, it can be stored in deep freezers at -20 Celsius. You can store it for a very long time until you need it for extraction. Humidity. And humidity is more important, I would say, in a sense, more important to manage, not saying more important as a whole, more important to manage because humidities are hard to manage. As I've explained, humidity fluctuates a lot during different stages of the cannabis cycle. So cultivation, during cultivation, which is again propagation till harvesting, 50 to 80% is optimal. Now you might be thinking, wow, 80%, isn't it going to create an environment for powdery mildew or yeast and mold? Well, the reason is that plants also transpire. So if they're transpiring, there's a transpiration happening, the humidity of the room itself increases. That's why you have dehumidifiers in place to reduce the humidity. If the humidity goes up, it reduces the humidity. But in the beginning stages, like during propagation, we need high humidity environment to grow, and the humidity then start to reduce as you go to flowering. Then after that, drying is controlled reduction of humidity. So when the plants goes into the drying room, because of their transpiring and everything, the humidity is very high, like 70, 75. And then it starts to decrease when you're drying the plant in a controlled environment. So it just starts to decrease as the plants are getting dried. And we target 45 to 60% to prevent the mold growth. And the storage, so we want to keep our humidity between 50 and 60. You can go 65, but I wouldn't recommend 65. I'd like to keep it 50 to 60 range is a good range. Don't for sure go above 65 for sure. That could, give an indication of increase in the yeast and mold growth. And also don't go too low. Too low humidity, like 20-30%, can make your product brittle, can make it less visually appealing or less from the organoleptic point of view, like from the sensory point of view. So these are some ranges, and hopefully this is helpful to give you some idea that how you can manage your humidity. One thing I think I missed is it says storage, but also for packaging, you can target the same humidity. Packaging and storage will comply with the same humidity requirements. So without taking too much time, these are the conclusion, and I will quickly go through that. Temperature and humidity compliance is both a quality and regulatory requirement. That makes sense because if someone asks you why I have to implement that, well, it's a regulatory requirement. It's not a choice. You need to have temperature and humidity compliance at a minimum. If you're injecting CO2 for growing your plants so that your plants grow maybe better, then you also have to have CO2 monitoring in place from health and safety point. Effective and real-time environmental monitoring is required. It's not mandatory as in for at least GACP that you need to have automated systems, but I do highly recommend that you should have a automated environmental monitoring system. It makes life much easier, save you labor and cost in long run. And many of these companies you work with, they will also provide you calibration at a subsidized cost, so you can have everything set in at a subsidized cost annually or through a subscription basis. And force temperature and humidity compliance through SOPs, trainings, and quality agreements. Quality agreement is the key here. I have seen dozens of quality agreements which do not mention about environmental monitoring at all. Sometimes they do not mention about quality at all. But quality agreement is important because you want to confirm when you're exporting your product, what are your temperature requirements when you're exporting the product? Is there any specific temperature ranges you want us to target? Who is responsible for logistics? Who is paying for that? It's going to be costly. All that questions may be covered during quality agreement. And last, maintaining these standards is pivotal for achieving long-term success and sustainability in cannabis operations. As we have seen in cannabis markets in Canada and in export markets, it's very important to maintain these standards, not just temperature and humidity, but quality as a whole. I hope this was informative, and thank you for listening. Jakob, to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I think there was a lot of, for me, at least, for to start get thinking about. Whilst we get people ready on the chat, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat on your right hand side of the screen. I think I would love to ask you, because you mentioned this a lot with when you are starting up with a cannabis operations. So my question to you is basically, where do you see people struggling the most when wanting to set up environmental controls for cannabis operations?
I would say people are struggling the most from the record keeping point.
Mm,
And I think the people who are required to work on and maybe take the readings or something like that, they're not concerned about it as much. The
mm,
clients sometimes I work with, because they think it's not such a big requirement, and it seems like it's not such a big requirement until you go to the GMP side of it, or until you are packaging, or until you are drying.
mm,
So, and that is where, when I was explaining that they have to have that habit of managing on the record keeping side from the beginning.
mm.
So I don't see that suddenly someone who's missing the record keeping on the cultivation and they get pro and start recording in the GMP. So
Yeah.
it's a behavior. So record
Mm,
keeping is important, and have proper communication. If you have missed some record keeping, tell your QA person, tell your compliance officer that you have missed this. What can I do?
mm.
Be upfront and trust them. They are there to help you. They're going to fix some things for you and help you figure out how to go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we have a question here is from Stefan. Do you see inspectors asking about the data that was used to set the specific temperature ranges?
Very good question.
Mm,
If you are in a GACP environment, just GACP, I think they might not, and again depends
mm,
on inspector to inspector.
mm,
If you are in GMP, yes, you need to have any data you're setting. It should be either backed up by the literature,
mm.
backed up by your own data, but it has to be also acceptable in a sense. If you, for instance, if you go to an inspector and say my packaging I allow 80% humidity, no data can back up. So
Mm.
as long as you have reasonable data or reasonable ranges, and they are backed by literature or your own research, I think you can make a good point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess also there are sort of local variations as well in terms of the level of reporting that one has to do, or the level of research that's been into to this. Does your experience back this up? Or?
Sorry, can you rephrase that question one time?
Yeah, so basically, I'm guessing that sometimes it can be an issue when you're dealing across borders in terms of what your specifications are, and how well defined those specifications are based on your own research. How do you tackle that challenge?
So I will tell you that specification as a question does not come during our quality agreements, and that is
Mm,
one of the thing. Um, there are so many things to tackle that environmental monitoring sometimes is just not given the due diligence as it should be,
yeah.
and so the specification does not come. But if it comes to me, and I want to ensure that the variation are kept to minimal during the cross-border transport and all, that's a question also to ask your logistics partner, and
Mm,
ask them that how you're going to ensure, or maybe you should be giving them, and because they haven't asked us like what is the
yeah.
temperature and humidity specification, but you should be upfront and tell them that we have to maintain between this temperature range. What are the steps you are taking to ensure that our product stays within this range? Because you have
Mm,
the loggers, but you're not reading those loggers until the product reaches to
yeah.
the company. So, I mean, and what's the point of having the loggers if you cannot take the action in the real time?
Yeah.
So that's where that will help you. The steps we take is more robust quality agreement,
Mm,
and covering ourselves up in a sense is that our logistic partners is also taking the equal amount of accountability when they're transporting the product, and they should be knowing what temperature ranges we are targeting. And and it's a good idea, maybe you should also run it by through your importing partner and let them know that this is our temperature and this temperature specification. If you have any questions around that, maybe this is the time we should chat about it.
Mm, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ashish. So I think another question that popped to my mind at least was, you mentioned a lot again, if you are starting out new, there could be some issues in terms of training. So, and that's also one of the things that often come up when we deal with clients in terms of temperature compliance as well. So where would you start, and where do you see the most benefit from starting with training? I mean, what subjects do you emphasize in your training, and which ones are the really ones important in terms of moving an organizations towards a better quality culture?
Very good question. And I will say it really depends how your training program is structured.
Mm,
And I will focus just on environmental monitoring. If I would have to do training starting brand new, we are implementing an environmental monitoring system. We will start with onboarding of a program where we have first of SOP written on the system you are using. And it doesn't has to be you're explaining each and every technical detail, but more like work instruction, like how to go from A to B, B to C, C to D, like in that format.
mm,
And invite all the people, do a live onboarding session. You go to the software, if it's an automated system, show them how the software works, show them how you can set up alarm monitoring, how you can uh, uh, deactivate the alarm if there's an alarm, and if you're deactivating, where you have to make the notes.
mm,
Tell them any questions which could come in upfront. For instance, there will be situations when there will be a lot of alarms in a day. And now,
mm,
if you have that situation, I will tell them, if you have too many alarms in a day, don't worry. These are your specs. If you still have an alarm reaching 2 hours of the limit and you still see that alarm, you go ahead, make a note why you have this alarm, what is the reason you think.
mm,
Next day, we are going to evaluate. However, if you think that alarm has breached 90% humidity is not coming down, tell us immediately.
mm,
So these are the things I will implement, and I will involve more people, not just one person. I will involve the general manager, I will involve QA manager, director. More people you have, the more accountability you have, and that way you can ensure that the training is properly conducted. If you just send them an SOP to sign, that won't be enough for the training point of view here. So that's where it is important to have an onboarding session.
yeah, absolutely. I think in the meantime here, another question came in from Radwan. So the question is, if a cultivator slash processor complies with and obtains Canadian GMP slash DEL certification, including meeting the environmental requirements, do they still need to follow and be certified under EU GMP, including environmental standards, in order to export to Europe, such as Germany?
That's a very good question, and I have seen this question before.
Mm,
The DEL license, it depends. I would say that you should actually check with your importing partner.
mm,
And I mean, and the reason I tell you this is even with the GACP, we see that the GACP standard is prevalent in many industries, and there are now different versions of GACP certificates. Sometimes people go for the whole certificate, sometimes people go for just like a declaration. But talk to your importing partner and ask your importing partner, okay, I have this DEL license, and then is that will satisfy you, because that complies with same GMP requirements in Health Canada, which should be equivalent to your EU GMP requirements.
mm,
Would that be sufficient for you? Because at the end of the day, if you obtain everything and your importer is not saying like, no, that's not enough for me. I need to see my certificate in my country, my certification process. What are you going to do? So
mm,
that's my first point of advice with the confusing regulatory requirements like this is talk to your importer.
mm.
Maybe find one partner. You have to do business with them. Just find one partner, have a conversation with them, throw this question out to them, and they will definitely have an answer for you because they would have dealt with it and they would
Yeah,
have worked with that exact person, exact kind of situation.
great. Thank you, Mrs. I think we're running out of time here, but thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on board with our webinars here, and hopefully we can have some more in the future. So if you do have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Ashish or us here at Eupry, and we'll be sure to help you along as well. If you have any ideas for um, uh, future webinars, sorry. But again, thank you very much. I'm going to throw it back to Frederica here, who will do the closing of this webinar.
Hi again, everyone. And yeah, as Jakob said, I just want to round things off for a second. Thank you so much for a great session, guys, and a really nice Q&A session. I just wanted to close out by saying that we offer right now, we call it a free consultant session with our senior product specialist, and it's only for the attendees of this webinar. So I'm just gonna put a link in the chat. So if you need some guidance on, it can be regulatory compliance or temperature and humidity compliance, you can just feel free to book a 30-minute, 45-minute, 15-minute meeting in with our senior product specialist, Mass, and he will be happy to assist you with anything that you might need some sparring on or some general advice. So yeah, thank you so much for today, and I'll leave the chat open for a second. And yeah, you should receive a recording afterwards as well, so you can save all the information that you learned today and go back, yeah, and view it again if you need to. Thank you so much for today.